Hola meus amigos, bem-vindos ao meu canal. One of my goals is to read more Brazilian literature, and I mean that beyond the usual suspects. You know, Clarice Lispector, Machado de Assis, not because I don't like these authors, but because I would like to explore a little bit more what is beyond them. A few months ago, I found myself at Half Price Books, as tends to happen to me for some weird reason, and I was just browsing the shelves and I found for $3.49 one of the most important Brazilian novels of the 20th century, Dona Flor e seus dois maridos by Jorge Amado. I had heard about Jorge Amado, just the name basically, and I knew that there was a little bit of a connection with magical realism, or at least that a connection could be made. So I looked up the novel there and then, and I learned that it is considered to be Amado's masterpiece. So I was like, this is it. Okay, unlike Bono, I had found what I was looking for. So let me tell you about the novel and my experience reading it. Dona Flor e seus dois maridos, Dona Flor and her two husbands, subtitled A Moral and Amorous Tale, was published in the year 1966. And this is Amado's 15th, yes, 15th novel, okay? We have an incredibly prolific author right here. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize at least 7 times. The novel is 518 pages long. It is divided into 5 parts, this story, and then those parts also include numerous relatively brief chapters. Now, each one of those parts is really clearly divided because they deal with different stages in the life of the main character, Dona Flor. We have first her first marriage, okay? Then we have her period of widowhood, or the deep mourning, as it is called. After that, we have a period of half mourning, so when she is getting out of that difficult, dark time in her life. Part 4 deals with her second husband, or her second marriage. And then finally we have in part 5, which is incredibly amazing, what we could call her double marriage. So I'm going to tell you also a little bit more about that. Now, who is Dona Flor? Okay, she is a professor of the culinary arts, okay, and she's a very proper, I would even say prudish lady, who marries a guy by the name of Badinho, and this guy is a really lustful man. Okay, he is dedicated to wine, women, and song, and gambling. Okay, so we also have to add that to his resume right there. You could say safely that this is a guy who really enjoys living la vida loca. Okay, let's just leave it at that. So Vadinho dies one day suddenly after a crazy, crazy night, right? And despite the fact that he was a bit of a player, in more senses than one, right? Dona Flor misses him. She is devastated by this loss that she experiences all of a sudden, unexpectedly, right? Eventually, there's another man who comes into her life, and this one is called Dr. Teodoro. And he is basically the opposite of Vadinho. He is educated, he is reserved, he is temperate, he is also a very serious person. And what happens is that in due time, she marries him. But she also still misses Vadinho's wild nature. And as a matter of fact, she misses Vadinho so much that just because of the power of that love that she has for him, one day the guy appears right there on her bed, naked. Okay, so this is really a really interesting situation, as you can tell. That is the whole premise of this great novel. And you can see also there the connection with magical realism, or at least with something that we could consider to be magical realism, with reservations, maybe, depending on your perspective on that. So I was going to describe this novel as a love triangle with a twist, because we have 3 characters in the love triangle, but one of those characters just so happens to be dead. Okay, so I consider that to be an interesting twist. Maybe something similar we can see in the novel Bruges la Mort by Georges Rodenbach. I have talked about it before. It's a novel that maybe inspired, at least indirectly, Vertigo by Hitchcock. So you could also add Vertigo here into the mix. But in this case, I'm going to say something different. I'm going to say that Dona Flor and her 2 husbands is the story of a love triangle with 2 twists, actually. Because yes, we have one of the characters who happens to be dead in this love triangle, but also Dona Flor is able to interact in a pretty close way, as you're going to see, with this character. So I consider that to be kind of like a second twist already to this whole idea of the love triangle that is not your typical love triangle. I have mentioned the main characters. Okay, we have those three characters right there, but there are many more. And as a matter of fact, one thing that struck me about Dona Flor is how carefully and how minutely crafted these so-called secondary characters are. And in that sense, what I was thinking is maybe we could say that Jorge Amado is like Dickens. You know how in Dickens sometimes you have secondary characters that are so interesting and so colorful that they are almost more interesting than the main characters, right? I wouldn't say that is the case precisely with Dona Flor, but what I'm saying here is that he really pays close attention to these secondary characters. And even the whole city, right, the city of Salvador Bahia, which is where the action takes place, emerges as a character in itself, because we have all of these not so important characters that end up being important because they add to this whole experience of the setting and of the place. So what is this society like? Okay, what is Salvador Bahia like in this novel? This is a really colorful, okay, a really diverse type of society. It's a society that is apparently conservative, okay, conservative in appearance mainly, I would say, but it is also a resilient type of society. It's very vibrant, okay, so those are maybe some words that I would use in order to describe this place and give you an idea of the people there. I think, one thing that cannot be stressed enough is how attentive to detail Amado is, okay? There is no such thing as just a detail for this author, it seems, based on my experience of his work. So what do you say? Let's look at some themes here just to have an idea of what we're talking about when it comes to, some important topics. Dona Flor e seus dois maridos is obviously about duality, okay? That is apparent from the very start. It's about the struggles that happen in the human heart. And in the last part of the novel, which is my favorite, really, of this reading experience, Vadinho appears and he tries to, quote-unquote, seduce his wife, okay? And she, as you know, is married now at this point to another man. So the problem here is that Dona Flor does not want to deceive, quote unquote, once again, her second husband with her first husband. But then Vadinho says, this is his argument here, that that would not be adultery because Vadinho has as much of a claim to Dona Flor as the second husband does, because at least, we can tell and we know that she has been married to both of them. So as a result of this interaction, with two different men, what happens is that Dona Flor also begins to experience a change because she has to adapt, right? And this is a main theme that I see right here. That is one of my favorite topics. And I would describe this as the idea that who we are depends on who we are with, right? Because we adapt to different people. There's actually a movie, that I have shown you before, but I want to recommend this one to you again. I think I know for a fact I mentioned this one when I talked about Bruges la Mort, which I have mentioned before in this video. This is Asako 1 and 2. And in this movie, what we have is a young woman who loses her first love, and then afterwards she meets another person who looks exactly like her first lover, but has a completely different personality. So you see what I'm saying here also with this idea that we adapt, we are who we are with. It depends, it depends on who we are with, our personality and the way we act. So the main theme to me of Dona Flor is, as the author puts it, the struggle between matter and spirit. Dona Flor is torn between two different types of lover, right? We have a carnal type of lover in Vadinho, and then we also have a more intellectual type of lover in Dr. Teodoro. And we could also look, if you wanted to go a little bit deeper, with more philosophical stuff, we could look at this duality in terms of Nietzschean ideas with, the oscillation between the Dionysian and the Apollonian, right? Between passion and between logic or reason. That is definitely there in this way that, Dona Flor navigates between these two husbands that she has. But I think, leaving that aside, I think I've said enough about that already, but I think it's also important to point out that the novel Dona Flor is about also social class. Okay, so we have that very, very important theme right there at the middle, because Vadinho belongs to the lower middle class, I would say. And on the other hand, Dr. Teodoro, he has a very successful business in this pharmacy that he operates. He also has a formal education. He has degrees. And the people of Salvador Bahia actually make a very big deal out of this when they are talking to Dona Flor about the possibility of her marrying this man, marrying for the second time. So Dona Flor has to adapt not only in romantic terms, right? It's not only about adapting to two different ways of making love, but she also has to adapt in an economic sense because she is migrating from one social class to another with this marriage or these two marriages that take place in the novel. And I would say at the bottom line with this, right, with the themes and everything, the novel itself, Dona Flor and Her Two Husbands, is just an amazing novel of manners that gives you an idea, a very complex and very comprehensive idea, a multi-layered portrayal, I would say, of the people of Salvador Bahia. So you get really a wonderful look into the life of this city. Now, let me share with you some criticism, okay, because I want to add another layer to this exploration that we are doing of the novel. I read a little essay on Dona Flor and Her Two Husbands by Bobby Chamberlain. He has a book on Jorge Amado, and one of the chapters is about this novel. So what he tells us really here is that, sometimes the allegorical dimension of the novel has been overemphasized, okay? He looks at some possible allegorical readings of the novel, but he says that it's probably not a good idea to try to do a matching exercise when it comes to the characters and the situations in the novel with, for example, the political situation in Brazil when the novel was published. Okay, to give you an example, many people read the novel, some critics, and said, oh yeah, Vadinho is a representation, or he stands for the president dictator of Brazil, Getulio Vargas. Okay, and Chamberlain says it's not that simple. Okay, that's kind of reductive to do that type of reading. So what he does is to favor a reading that considers allegory. Okay, doesn't negate it, so it definitely keeps it in consideration, but also mixes it a little bit with fantasy. Okay, so that way we have kind of like a more complex type of approach to this novel. And another important thing that I need to mention so that what I'm about to read to you makes a little more sense is that he looks at this novel also in dialectical Hegelian terms, okay? Because we obviously have Vadinho as a thesis, right? Then we have Dr. Teodoro as an antithesis, and then when Dona Flor is with both of them, we have a kind of synthesis there for her, right? So I think that makes sense to me. So let me read you a little bit from what Chamberlain says about this whole thing that I have just introduced for us. I would agree that on one level, Vadinho is indeed meant to symbolize the traditional politics of populism in Brazil, and that Flor serves to represent the country and its people. By the same token, Teodoro epitomizes the technocratic and military sectors of Brazilian society, both historically and at the time of the book's writing. The political implications for Brazil seem clear. Order and discipline can lead to material progress for a nation, just as a warm personalist approach to government can turn out to be spiritually fulfilling. Both have their negative aspects as well as their positive, and neither can be totally satisfying without the countervailing force of the other. A second level of symbolism, more social than political, may also be detected. Here, the two husbands may be seen to represent the vices and virtues of their respective social classes. It is here that the quasi-allegory turns into fantasy. On a symbolic level, the novel's magical resolution is not meant to reflect historical fact, but is rather a speculatory statement on Amado's part about what he sees as the inevitable solution to Brazil's continuing ordeal. Only through a strong coalition of both of these forces can an effective and wholly satisfactory system be achieved. Brazil, like Flor, is otherwise incomplete. The film. Okay, yes, there is a film, and I absolutely loved it. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about that. This novel is really not easy to adapt. Okay, when you think about the story and the way it is presented with all of those secondary characters, all of those colorful situations, the fantasy also and all that, this is really not easy to adapt. But Bruno Barreto and company, right? All the people who were involved in this just did an excellent job. And I am so happy that I saw the movie, because I already had, of course, an appreciation of the novel, but it's like the film kind of drove the point home for me. This is just a magnificent story, and being able to see it, really helped me to grasp that and to gain an appreciation of the whole story by Jorge Amado. The film was released in the year 1976. So we're talking exactly 10 years after the publication of the novel. 10 years after, that rings a bell. Okay, I don't know, let's just leave it at that. So I love the color palette, okay, I love the setting, I also love the music. The music is just wonderful. But I think the most amazing aspect of this film is just the casting. Okay, we have Sonia Braga as Dona Flor, we have Jose Wilker as Vadinho, and then Mauro Mendonça as Dr. Teodoro, and they just bring these characters to life in an amazing way. Okay, it's I have used the word amazing here many times, but I am kind of doing that on purpose, because that's exactly how I feel about this. And also, it's not just about the three most important characters, as I suggested before. The secondary characters are there too, in wonderful ways. So I think they really achieved something that was very, very difficult to achieve. And I just think that this was really, really well done in terms of adapting this text to film, because we get everything here. Okay, we get the humor, the melancholy is also there, the carnality of the story, the vibrancy of this whole story and this whole idea by Amado. So everything is there, portrayed in just a wonderful way, okay, a memorable way. You're not going to forget about this experience, of either reading the novel or watching the film. I think the film really does a wonderful job of reinforcing that, and I really like the fact that the setting, and everything was so well done. It's real, okay? They don't need to create it, it's there. And the thing is, I don't have an experience, of Brazil. And that was a difficult part for me when I was reading the novel. I wished I was able to see this, right? I went to Brazil, but I was a little kid, I must have been like 4 years old. So I can't really bring that to my experience of reading the text. Plus, the place that I visited in Brazil at that early age is kind of like, the beach for the most part, a place for tourists, clearly, from what I remember, so I didn't have the experience of the reality, right? And I was able to see that through this film. And by the way, this is a really, really popular film. I understand that to this day, this is the third most popular film in Brazil, after, get this, Jaws and Titanic. So we're talking like really, really important. If you look it up and you look at the the rating on IMDb, that doesn't really give you a clear idea of how important this film is and how beloved it is. So really, I have nothing to say against this film, and I think it really does justice to the novel as much as that is possible, when you adapt something, a text so rich like this one, into film. It's kind of like adapting the Tin Drum. It's not an easy task, but they did a really, really magnificent job when it came to that. Bottom line, G.K. Chesterton said, to choose one thing is to reject everything else. This novel, I think, considers the possibility of what would happen if all of a sudden we could have an exception to that rule. And I think that in itself is always, something interesting. This is a masterful novel. And let me tell you, it improves as you continue to read it. It doesn't go like this. It doesn't go down like some novels do. It doesn't go up and then down like others. It doesn't stay at the same level. It really goes up, okay? It just keeps going up until you get to that fifth part that I'm telling you, it's just unforgettable. And it took me places that I have never been before when it comes to my reading experiences. So read it, my friend. Você precisa ler este romance. It's gonna make you want to read more by Jorge Amado, and also more Brazilian literature, which, as you know, is just criminally underrated. And that's one of the reasons why I want to explore it more. After all, I spent most of my life being a neighbor. I lived right there, right next to Brazil. So I really want to explore more of their literature. And I am definitely going to share my experience with you as I do that. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Those were my 2 cents on Dona Flor e seus dois maridos, Dona Flor and her 2 husbands by Jorge Amado. Muito obrigado pela visita e tenha ótimo dia.